Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Are you ready to change the world? Well, Cheryl Heller will show you how through social design. The power, the purpose, and the planning for a better planet. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here.
Let's start talking a little bit about yourself. You're a professor, you're the founder of CommonWise. Talk about that a little bit.
I founded the first MFA program in social design, and I have a consulting design lab, practicing social design called CommonWise. And I also founded an organization called the Measured Lab, which is looking at how to actually measure the difference that social design makes in human health. And I got there through many years of working in the corporate world, helping big companies get bigger, merge, acquire, reimagine themselves when the time was right, and then eventually looked for more purpose in my life and found my way to social design.
In the preface of your book, you write, this is the result of years of practice and observation. What is the single, if you can bring it down to one reason why you wrote this book?
I have come to see that social design is the how that we, meaning human beings, Homo sapiens, can work together and solve problems together. That we have enormous, great intention to turn things around, to make society more just, to make businesses more creative, but we haven't had a process for doing that. And I have seen through many years of doing this that this design process is a way for people to collaborate, to create together, to imagine together, and to implement in ways that are good for lots of people instead of only a few.
Who would benefit the most from this book?
Anybody who wants to be a leader and recognizes that being a leader today means living with ambiguity, navigating chaos, not relying on 5-year plans because they don't matter anymore, because 5 years is a lifetime. I wanted it very much to be not just for designers or people who think of themselves as designers, but for anyone who wants to be the person who steps up and says, let's try this, let's do this, let's go here.
The title, Intergalactic Design Guide, Harnessing the Creative Potential of Social Design. Why did you use the word intergalactic?
A couple of reasons. There's a wonderful environmental writer named David Orr who wrote a book called Earth in Mind. And when I read it about 25 years ago, I found a quote in there. He said that as Homo sapiens' entry into any intergalactic design competition, our civilization would be tossed out at the qualifying round. Meaning, not just education isn't working, not just government's broken, not just, energy or whatever it is, but this whole concept that human beings have built and are so proud of is a faulty design. It's a bad design because it's not sustainable. And at first I thought, well, that's not fair to lay the whole thing at the feet of design. And as I started thinking about it, I wondered if it meant that design could play a role in fixing it. So from the time I read it 15 years ago, it's sort of been on my mind. And I love it for the title of the book because of that, because it's been so much to me, but also because one of the things I wanted with a book is to avoid all of the jargon of this soundbite and that, weekend workshop of design thinking and all of the ways that we obfuscate the simple principles that lead to more creative and just society. So in elevating it above this is another book on, this is another business book on how to fix our problems. I liked looking at it from an intergalactic perspective.
Chapter 1 is the answer to everything. What is that answer?
The answer is communication. I have always felt that communication could solve 99% of the problems we have. If you ask any organization or employees in any organization what a problem is, they always say bad communication. Communication is bad here. So I think if we learn to actually listen to each other and have a dialogue with people who think differently than we do, most of the problems that we face would go away. And so the core and the basis of this practice is communication between people and learning how to do it and having a template and a process for doing it.
It's interesting, when you think of communication, you think of speaking and, more importantly, listening. Is that what you mean?
I mean listening. I mean being aware of what someone's getting. I teach a communication design class, and one of the first things I tell my students is, it doesn't matter what you mean to say. You will not get good points for having great intention, right? Because we're so often unaware of the gap between what we say and what somebody hears. And I think communication, really humble communication, is the first act of generosity, right? When we talk to someone and we actually think about, well, where do I need to start this so that they can come along with me? What are they currently thinking, and what do they need to know? And how can I make it accessible to people instead of using my own, argot and thinking about whether I sound smart or not? So that's an act of generosity that includes listening, but it's also in the way we speak to each other.
Okay, what is social design?
Think of social design as the same design process that has led to killer products and breakthrough commercial ideas applied to human relationships instead of physical materials or bits and bytes, and done at scale. It is a way to engage cross-disciplinary teams or diverse people with diverse points of view in the creative process. And the outcome, instead of looking to come up with the thing, whether that's a service or an app or a product that will solve a problem, social design aims to create the conditions for success, in that it aims to create agency in people, a sense of possibility in people. It teaches everyone who participates in it the creative process. And so in a corporation, if you have an organization filled with people who understand how to reframe problems and have a sense of possibility, they'll innovate repeatedly. It's not looking for that one silver bullet. And in a community, if you have people who have a sense of themselves as having agency, then they'll act on that. And likewise, if you have a community with values, those values will become acted upon. So it's a longer-term strategy for ongoing behavior that is creative and beneficial and generative.
How much have humans changed over the centuries?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but I think one of the critical changes is that technology has enriched our lives. It's helped us know more, but it's come with a price. It has disconnected us from nature. And in disconnecting us from nature, it's disconnected us from our own bodies and our senses. And so we don't connect with the earth in a way that we used to. We don't connect in the earth the way indigenous people do. We've lost touch with just our physical awareness and our perception of other people and of the things around us. And that's the price we've paid, I think, for living in a digital world and living with devices all the time.
We've become robotic.
I think we've become robotic. There's a wonderful book by David Abram called The Spell of the Sensuous. And he talks about the awareness that indigenous people have the sensitivity. You know, there are people who can walk through the jungle at night and find their way because they're aware of how the insects sound, or what level in the tree, in the forest canopy, you know, there's activity. We have none of that. And Jared Diamond, in his Introduction to Gun, Germs, and Steel, he talks about why the average New Guinean is smarter than the average Londoner. Because one of them walks through the jungle every day and has to be aware of everything around him and make decisions. And another one takes his paper and gets on the tube and goes to the same office every day. And that's what civilization has done to us.
Does today's technology demand we think and do things differently? And does that make that change any easier?
It helps us do things differently. It lulls us into being more dependent on it. It lulls us into accepting what we see and hear. It doesn't encourage critical thinking. It tells us how to think. There was some research that people who read blog posts and all of those, here's the top 5 things to do, actually that makes us stupider. And reading novels and reading, you know, complex narratives actually makes us smarter and gives us empathy.
You highlight some really impressive social designers that started with the will, but do they always, or are they always sure of the way?
One of the hallmarks of social design is that it begins with an outrageously ambitious goal. Jeffrey Brown, who runs Brown Superstores in Philadelphia, decided that he wanted to use his grocery business to end poverty. And that becomes a North Star with all the people who succeed in social design. But oftentimes they have no idea where getting there will take them. And one of the characteristics of social design is that you never lose sight of the North Star and you never stop pivoting as you need to. I can tell you a story about Jeffrey Brown if you'd like.
I like his story because a lot of people say that you would never make money, there's no such thing as great grocery stores in poor neighborhoods, but he saw things differently.
He saw things differently because he listened to what people in the neighborhood wanted. And he was willing to trust them and to act on that.
And the beauty of that is the chain reaction from that, because it affects health. We talk about in poor neighborhoods diabetes and high blood pressure. Right. So it's such a chain reaction when you start out with that intention.
Exactly. And when you think about the nature of a grocery store, that you have an opportunity to create a center where much more than food is available for people.
Social design replaces common sense with wisdom?
This is connected to the idea of being aware and paying attention to what's around us instead of accepting. Common sense said Jeffrey Brown would fail launching a grocery store in a food desert. Common sense tells us to do things the way people do them. And that becomes a kind of hegemony that prevents us from questioning. And one of design's, any kind of design throughout history, one of design's greatest contributions is questioning things, right? And wisdom comes from paying attention and acting in a way that's based on what's really needed and right at a given time instead of how people think we should behave.
It's interesting. A lot of people give a lot of credit to disruptors these days, but you mentioned something before about the intention. So you don't disrupt just to disrupt, but you have an intention for greater good.
Exactly. I think no one disrupts themselves without some external need. And organizations may set out to disrupt the status quo, but unless that's done with a purpose, unless that's done with a very carefully articulated idea of what they want to create, there's nothing to hold it together, right? I mean, we've seen all over the world disruptors who just want to stick their finger in the fan and cause trouble. It doesn't turn into a situation that's better than what existed before. And so that disruption is a creative disruption instead of simply the destruction.
How does social design start? What does one do after the vision?
When the vision is articulated in a way that's actionable. So one of the most difficult things is to articulate the vision in as concrete a way as is needed to define the action that should be taken to make it real, right? So the vision can't be a generality. Once that's done, it's very easy to sort of scope the issue. Jeffrey Brown knew, because we're talking about him, Jeffrey Brown knew he wanted to open stores in these poor neighborhoods in Philadelphia. Then what becomes evident is a number of conditions for success. Number one, he was going to have to figure out a way to make money, even though people couldn't afford the food he was selling. He was going to have to gain their trust. He was going to have to understand them at a level that he didn't currently. So from that vision, you begin to scope. Who are the stakeholders? Who needs to be involved in this if it's going to succeed? And what needs to happen if it's going to succeed? And that's a really fun part.
I know words matter, but you say words especially matter in social design, going back to your communication issue.
Back to the communication, and also thinking about when there are no visible dynamics. By that I mean when we're working on relationships between people and the kinds of dynamics that affect ourselves, our future, our businesses, communication becomes even more important because communication is the basis of all relationships. And we tend to speak in generalities when we speak about relationships. If you're commissioning someone to design you a house, you're not going to say, I want a really cool house, or I want to feel really good in my house. You're going to say, I want this kind of a house, it should be covered in this, it should have this many rooms, right? And we can be very specific about that, but when we talk about the future, we fall back on generalities. We fall back on words like well-being and social value and things that aren't actionable because they're not concrete. So that's why it's more important.
Talk about group think, and how would social design fit into an existing corporate structure with its endless meetings and endless committees and reports?
I think the key word in that question is fit into, because those endless meetings and corporate speak are the melees. They are what prevent people from different departments working together, people from finding themselves in a conversation where they both realize they've been working on something they're very excited about, but it's off, it's off the to-do list for their department. And those are the precise symptoms of a culture that prevents creativity and innovation. And so it's the cracking of that calcified hierarchy that infects with social design. It gives people, and inevitably, when people have a chance to come together and actually participate in creating, it's the most fun thing they've done, and everybody wants to do it again.
It seems like it would have to start from the top, because a lot of people would be afraid that that's their job that they may be giving up by becoming so open to let other people come in. So you have to almost have a guarantee from the top. No, you're not going to lose your job, but let other ideas come in.
It absolutely needs to come from the top, and typically it's embraced at the bottom, and then both those forces have to come together and bang heads in the middle to let them let go, to help them let go of fear of losing control.
Talk about the designers of the past, perhaps working behind the scenes, to the designers today brought center stage and into C-suites?
There was a time in the beginning of the industrial age where designers were the anonymous people in the back rooms of factory just making sure that things fit on the assembly line. And then with the emergence of people like Charles and Ray Ames and Bucky Fuller and the designers who began this kind of cult of personalities who proved that a designer's vision actually added value to the product, that proved that this notion of something that was designed actually changed the fortunes of companies. And designers took on really important, essential roles in the voice and the products of companies. What's happened now, or what happened over the last maybe 15 years, is corporations started needing to think about things at a more systemic level, and designers stepped into that role. You know, now designers get a call from a country saying, come and help us reimagine our education system. And so the notion of design's power to change fortunes, to disrupt, is being recognized.
You mentioned a new world where anthropology, behavioral science, politics, and design of culture itself overlap. And it's similar to what you just talked about, where you really reimagine the whole system of education.
Yes, yes. Education is a whole other topic. Reimagine, but also find a template and a process that invites people with really divergent points of view into the same room. And more than anything else almost, design has always been a process for getting things done. You know, designers know how to start with nothing and end up with something that they actually meant to end up with. And so this process has a way of, has a rhythm that includes time for people who really differ to come together and discuss it and find ways to align, and then relies on every single one of those people with diverse experience and point of view to have common skills like communication, like collaboration. So that diversity is sort of in contrast with the common skills that allow people to work together.
No matter what skill you have that you're bringing to the table, communication has to be one of them.
Communication has to be one of them, collaboration has to be one of them, critical thinking has to be one of them, a comfort with experimentation has to be one of them, humility has to be one of them, willingness to put expert status aside and to be in a learning environment has to be one of them. So it has much less to do with whether somebody is a lawyer or a doctor or a scientist than can they come to a condition of humility and learning and collaboration.
What are the essential principles of social design?
The principles of social design include, and I think of them as sort of the operating system, the values that keep social design or that ensure that it's of benefit to most people, is a willingness not to impose an answer, that solutions come from the inside out, not the outside in. This willingness to experiment that I talked about, that research is prototyping and it's done with the people who are involved. Communication, we talked about, a state of inquiry, learning instead of knowing, and that basis in research and in being focused on the people that are sort of that stand to benefit most from what the work is about.
What are the skills of the future?
The skills of the future include creativity, communication, cross-disciplinary problem solving, critical thinking, and all of those things that allow people to work together to generate ideas, those things that can't be automated or done by robots or done by artificial intelligence.
If a traditional business has been doing business as usual, how does one succeed with the disruption of social design?
If a business has been doing business as usual, I question whether they can keep doing business as usual, given the state of life today and how quickly it changes. The best way to introduce social design is to experiment with it, is to take a social design approach. It's to choose an outrageous goal, to make sure that that has both social and financial value, and then experiment. Just try it out and see how people like it and talk to people about what they want to do. So the process is lovely because you don't have to one day say, okay, we're changing everything, right? You can say, let's try to create something that's different from what we're thinking. Let's try to create conditions that we want to see in our company or our community or our world.
How can social design start as one thing and just move into another?
It has to do with that outrageously ambitious goal that in order to succeed at those, it requires the fluidity and the agility to start as one thing and become another. And because social design is based on experimentation and feedback loops, it's actually more safe than that sounds. When Jeffrey Brown is experimenting with something, he doesn't invest $10 million in redoing the store for this. He tries it out. And if people like it, he does it. And if people don't like it, that's fine. Not much was lost. And that is the way that ideas emerge. It's almost like one decision emerges from the next instead of this reliance on, no, I'm not changing because our 5-year plan was approved by the board, and so we see the world is going in a different direction, but we have to stick to our plan.
Paul Polak, 84 years old. His story is of the importance of giving the right tools in social design. The people in a poor rural village in India wanted clean drinking water, proved to be partners with him in a global effort. Normally, such people would be dismissed, they wouldn't be listened to. Is it a belief in social design that no one is insignificant in the process for a better life?
It's part of the principle of social design that in order to accomplish something, everyone who is affected by that should have a voice. So there are lots of people that aren't germane to a particular project or particular goal, and a lot of people think that it has to be open source and you have to talk to everyone, and so that's going to be time consuming and that's, sort of diversionary. That's not true, right? It's very intentional that obviously Paul's approach is market creation. Paul looks to create economies where they didn't exist before. And you can't create an economy if people aren't willing to partner in that. And so the people in the villages are crucial to the success of the enterprise. And they are Paul's audience, they are Paul's partner. He says in the course of his life, he's interviewed 3,000 poor people, and he always asks them why they're poor, and they always know.
That's his recipe. Talk about Polak's recipe. Simple, obvious, and includes an invention.
Well, Paul believes in doing the practical and the obvious, which he says are hard for most people to see. The invention comes from his approach of market creation. If you're going to start an economy, there has to be something at the center of it with financial value to sell. And so in the case of Spring Health, his project in India, he found and adapted a 5-cent water purifier. And from that little trigger, he looks to create a ripple effect. So from that, he found and developed people who wanted to sell clean water, people who wanted to deliver it, people who wanted to buy it. And that little 5-cent item becomes the way that he triggers these new economies.
The Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus. How does an existing institution follow social design to change the future and the city around it?
Matt Instis, who is the CEO of the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, used the principles of social design he set out to revitalize the city and to use his acreage in the medical campus to have an effect far beyond the limits of the medical campus. And so one of the first things he did was to put some neighbors on his board, which people didn't think like that, right? He understands the notion of networked innovation, that you want to change a city, then you need to involve people in the city in doing that. And he's also continually inventing and continually experimenting.
And I guess part of it would be to keep the people in the city, because most people who come to change their city get the people who are there out of it or push them out.
Well, exactly. Keep the people in the city. And also in the case of Buffalo, there's an enormous number of people who, people in Buffalo are crazy about the city, but many of the young people left because there weren't jobs. And so now they're looking for a way to come back and finding more jobs there.
How a hospital, simply by its design, can heal?
Mass Design, the architectural firm in Boston, has sort of hacked the process of architecture. And by now, I've talked about design as a process a lot. So the process is the system that creates different outcomes. Mass Design, when they're thinking about a built environment, they're not thinking about what a typical architect thinks about, which is, this is going to be great for my reputation, or I want a building that's going to go on my website that will be, my signature style. They're thinking about every aspect of decision-making and construction that can help the people who live there. They only use local workers. Whenever they can, they use local materials. Sometimes they teach people to use traditional building methods that they don't know how to do yet. And there's a wonderful story about a hospital in Rwanda where these workers, they did a stone exterior that was a very traditional way of building. And the workers went all around the building, and when they came back to where they started, they said, we actually want to tear this out and do it again because we got better as we went around.
And you know what I love about that too? Didn't they turn the patients toward the windows?
Yeah. Traditionally, patients' heads are against the wall so that there's a big aisle in the middle and doctors can easily walk up and down. Well, they questioned why that was so. They put the patients' heads in the middle looking out the window. The doctors have to walk around the perimeter, but patients got better and went home faster.
So as we conclude, obviously, even architecture can have social value.
Think about the role that the built environment plays in our lives, right? Even what does it feel like to go into a hospital, right? And Michael Murphy writes about this a lot. When you're sick and vulnerable, the building, most of the way hospitals are conceived is for the benefit of the physicians and the staff. And all of the structures we have that are designed to feel intimidating, right? Those big facades to make us feel small and be sort of an ode to the power of whoever built them. There's enormous influence. Michael always says, no architecture is without effect, right? There is no neutral.
How do we get there from where we are? A divided nation, wealth in the hands of a few. How do we get there?
We say we have to start where we are. We have to start with what we have. And I think it's just by trying it. In my graduate program, the thing we struggle with most is to get people doing what we call making, right? Get them to just try things, because we tend to live in our heads. We tend to want to get things perfect, get plans perfect before we're willing to try it. And in fact, it starts with a conversation. You know, you and I, before we started this, had a conversation that we both have interest in foster care in common, right? You know, it wouldn't take much for us to sort of put our networks together and to figure out what to do about that. And that's the way it starts, right? And we have to, I think, come to a mindset of possibility. Designers are typically happy people because we've learned how to create. And no matter how bad your day is, you know, you get up in the morning and you get to try something else, right? There is this sense of agency and possibility. And that's pretty addictive. And it's a better addiction than sitting in front of a computer all the time.
I love it. And why isn't everyone doing it?
It threatens people. It takes a certain kind of courage that feels more frightening before you do it than when you're doing it. And for people who don't like play, don't like experience or experimenting, or haven't had a chance to play in a long time, it can be really difficult. People who are comfortable being an expert and having answers. And think about, you know, the history of business, right? CEOs reward fast decisions and people who have an answer. And we're conditioned to be experts and to always know what should be done. And that's the opposite of what this takes. This takes a more childlike willingness to not know.
Bottom line question, can social design be profitable?
It absolutely is profitable. Interface Carpet, that has been just a global leader in becoming a sustainable company in an industry that has been one of the most polluting and toxic. They are the largest carpet tile manufacturing company in the world. Everyone, you know, Jeffrey Brown is another example. There is nothing about tax status and nothing about financial reward that is precluded by social design. And Larry Fink, in his letter to CEOs this year, said financial value will no longer be enough, that they will be looking, BlackRock will be looking for companies that create social value as well as financial value.
You were terrific.
Thank you for saying that.
You were terrific. And join us next time on Sarder TV, where creative minds come to share their ideas. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Thanks for watching.